Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Book of Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Creator Talk Podcast, a podcast about book conversations with your favorite bookish content creators. This episode is brought to you by Bookem, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookemapp.com. Join our community where bookish conversations happen. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the wonderful Lupita Aquino. Lupita is the book content creator behind the always informative Lupita Reads. Lupita is also the creator of Read Latine Lit, a reading challenge designed to get readers to read more Latine authors. Lupita is a writer, a curator, an advocate, a moderator, a host, a panelist, and a community builder. Lupita, welcome to the Creators Talk Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And like I said, just watching your content and enjoying some of the things that you've talked about. I kind of want to get a little bit into like growing up. Like, what roles did books play for you? And like, what were particular stories that shaped your love for reading?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So growing up, I basically figured out, or I remember learning, because I think a lot of it is thinking back to what your childhood was like. So a lot of reflecting and thinking about where I am now and how did this happen? How did I end up? Did I always love reading? A lot of that, I think, brought me to this a lot of formative memories I have when I was a kid, which is basically of my mom who who I think pinpointed my love for reading early on and in her own way was able to kind of continue to feed that. And that was when she noticed I would read National Geographics when she would basically clean houses for folks in the neighborhood. And so a lot of them were National Geographic subscribers. And she noticed that while she was cleaning, I would sit there and with her, while she was cleaning the houses, and I would flip through the pages. And so she started asking folks if, she could have the old copies for me. So she would bring them home for me. And then, that started that. And then she also started bringing home like old books that folks didn't want. And so I was reading things that were probably way beyond my like age range. Like I think I read the Yaya Sisterhood book at one point, which is about I think there was like about addiction. One of the sisters is like addicted and
Wow.
to some I think alcoholism or something. It was just like really deep. And I remember being like not really understanding, but also being like, oh wow. So
Yeah,
that was kind of
yeah.
my intro. Yeah.
That's incredible. Like just the depth of reading at such an early age. Like how do you think that kind of has turned into how you read now? And just like even when you're talking about reading the National Geographic and just exposure to culture and things like that.
Honestly, I think it really fueled a love for learning and like learning about different people's stories, different cultures, different um just just a thirst for so many different stories and getting to know different cultures through stories. So I think that National Geographic, though it was, and I remember when I was young, I don't think I absolutely like read every single page. I did get to a point, I think, earlier that I can recall, that I can remember where I was reading it literally like from the front page to the back. Um, and it had really interesting stories in there about like different people and like obviously like ecosystems and all that great stuff. So yeah, I think it really did impact the way that I read now every day and what I look for in a book when I decide what I'm going to read. So definitely an impact.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about like those particular moments that like kind of transformed you from someone who loves books and to going into being more like vocal advocate for literacy and community. Like when did that kind of spark for you?
Honestly, when I joined social media as like someone who loves books. So, I joined back in 2015, when Instagram was just a picture app, when it didn't belong to anyone else. And I think, it ended up being sold to the guys that own Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
But way back then, I was on the app just at a personal account. And so I found myself being able to connect with other people there, even though I had a private account and it was just like other queer people. And then I realized like, oh, well, I guess this is a space where I could possibly also connect with other people who love books or are reading books. And at the time I was unemployed and I was in between, jobs. I was looking for a new job. And I was just reading a whole lot more. And, my wife would come home and she would, she actually had a job and I would be like, oh my God, I read this. And, I'm starting this. And I was so excited. And she was like, okay, but I just haven't read it. And I thought maybe I could find someone online, on Instagram that has read it. So I made an app. Or no, sorry, I didn't make an app. I made an account and I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. And at first I thought I was like the only one that was going to be doing this thing. And then I found Bookstagram and I was like, oh, wow, this is like a thing. Like people are on here, which was like such a delight because I really did dive nose deep into like what other people were reading and trying to create community and connections like through what folks were reading. And so spending a little time like just navigating Bookstagram and realizing what it was that people were reading, I just got this idea that there were certain books that people weren't reading and weren't talking about. And like you could just kind of sit back and observe and realize, like, wait, you can tell that there's some books that get this big shout out on social media. And how come the other books don't? And then, you start putting two and two together. And I was like, wait a minute, like, there's not a lot of books by authors of color, like all of these books that, we're pushing to be read or that are like literary and they're winning prizes. A lot of them are just books written by white people. And so that just like really did something to me. I made that connection with connections in my past where a lot of, again, what I was reading, the Yaya Sisterhood, like a lot of those books early on that I was reading or that I did have access to were books or that were being promoted to me or recommended to me in the library were books by people, like by white people. And so I don't know, I was like, what can we do? How can we change this? How can we get people to notice books that aren't just the ones that are, highlighted and pushed forward? And so that was just kind of an introduction into how it was that I decided that I wanted to be open about that.
Yeah, you're talking about such an interesting time in the book space too, like 2016. Because I remember we used to do like book media, so we talked to like a lot of authors in that time. And I'm sure you can relate as a creator, where when you first got on Bookstagram, they would give you the free book, and you try to read every single book, and you felt so happy that every publisher would just give you anything, and you're jumping into all these
Yes.
giveaways and everything. And then you start to see like, wait, hold up. There's so many books that are just never highlighted because of I don't want to call it an echo chamber, but there is a level of that was happening specifically during that time, even though it still happens a lot now. So I'm curious to hear how you thought about that and like how you broke out of that as a
Yeah.
creator yourself.
I mean, honestly, I think I'm still sort of breaking out of it. And, I think when you say echo chamber, I know it's like, it doesn't feel like that. And it doesn't, it's not always like that. But I think for the most part, it can be like that. Like the literary space online and even in person is so small. And it just, a lot of the things I know if I were to talk to a friend offline who is not connected to the literary spaces online, and even something like American Dirt and the controversy around that book, people would look at me like, huh? Like a lot of the major America, that reads books had no idea about American Dirt and the controversy behind it and like, the true issues and problems with it. And so yeah, it is like a funnel. Like we are just kind of talking to each other. And so I think it's a hard thing to admit to yourself too that when you are pushing books that you feel like, or not pushing books, but you become passionate about books that are undersupported or, aren't getting the same level of limelight that other books are, you have to kind of accept something that I think is, as a creator, a contrary, right? As a creator, you want to grow, you want to build your community, you want to build, your platform, whatever it is. But I think that it has come to a point where sometimes, like, if you want to push books sometimes that you're passionate about, like unless you're a super large creator, and even then, you're more likely to be able to build a community, in my opinion, if you're pushing a book that is popular. You know, again,
Yeah.
unless you are like some maxed out celebrity who's, you know, like Selena Gomez or something, you know what I mean, who is reaching her base and her area of folks. But I don't know, it's really hard to grow and to do both. And I know that there's a lot of creators who kind of navigate that and try to do both, you know, try to read and promote books that are not underrated, not in the echo chamber, and also like read some that are, you know. And I just because I do the majority of the books that I do read are books by Latine authors, and they really, really do not get a whole lot of support, even the ones that become big titles for publishers that do promote them. Um, it's just really rare to see like a bestseller, you know, that
Yeah.
a breakout. And yeah, I just often found myself just being one of those people that people are like, oh, I'd never heard of that book before. And even though it was out like 2 years ago, you know what I mean? And so it's almost accidental, you know, like it's almost accidental in trying to break out the echo chamber, but also in a way like trying to figure out how to be intentional about it. And um, I feel like you need to be intentional about it because it is also important to like it's another way to connect with people. You know, people are going to pick up a popular book and they're more likely to engage with you and talk to you about it if they've read it, right? So it's like
Yeah.
you kind of have to do both. And sometimes when I'm like stuck in my read Latine literature challenge, I don't necessarily do the best of doing both.
Right.
And so yeah, I don't know, it's accidental. But I want to be more intentional about it. I want to figure out how to hit those algorithms so that people know more about, you know, good books. I mean,
Right.
it's not necessarily just about Latine literature, but it's also just about the wealth of good books written by BIPOC authors. You know, like some of these books people are like recommending or saying like this is the best book I've ever read. I'm like,
You're like, not so much. I was listening to your interview on minorities in publishing with Jen Baker, and you were talking about that American Dirt moment. Because I remember that specifically. I don't know if it was the first one that I really can think about, but it's one that I guess it would be the first one that kind of popped out as like one of those bookish drama moments. And you had Oprah post picking it as a book of the month, and you have the community saying like, no, this it was just a crazy time. Can you talk about that a little bit as just a curator in the space? Like, how do you kind of deal with some when those things pop up? Like, how do you kind of center yourself? How do you see like what's right? How do you kind of play in those spaces?
yeah, no, you know, it's I feel like the question is American Dirt was very unique.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think that we've seen the last of American Dirt, and I don't think that, and not for Latine community either. I think that we're going to continue to see books that kind of transverse that commercial literary, you know, that commercial fiction um, phase, which is again I think a greater question of literature, right, and what a literature means and how fiction works. And I think we're not, yeah, all that to say, I don't think we're done seeing the last of American Dirt, but American Dirt was really unique in the sense that there was just a lot of misinformation, I think. Um, and it's almost like creators and reviewers in the Latine community were saying one thing, and you had, you know, typically white readers understanding and hearing another thing. You know, it went from going like this book has elements that are stereotypical of the Latine community, um, and it's also presenting itself as a voice for immigrants when there are people that are immigrants that are undocumented that have written their own stories and their own memoirs. So it was a lot of trying to course correct misinformation that was used to try to propel this book as something that it wasn't. And the way that white readers took it was like, don't read it, burn it, it's censorship, she's getting threats. And it really just it really just went, I think, a whole different way. And I think being a creator in that space at the time was really hard because it's almost like a group of, not a group, but a good amount of people that were following me, that were part of my community, sort of turned their back on me, and they turned away from me, and they were like, "Wait a minute, we don't like what you're saying. We don't like that you're policing what we're reading or what we should and shouldn't read." And it felt really tough to be a creator at that time. I think at that time I was really like, I'm about to it's not worth it. Like, I don't feel like I need to educate people, but when I was a creator in that space, centering myself, it was in a place of, I want to course correct the misinformation that you're getting. I want to give you the information that you're seeking, that you think you're seeking through this book. And it didn't turn out to be like that. So that was really tough. Um, and I think I've learned from that experience that I don't have to I don't have to educate anyone. Like, it's not my responsibility to do that. And I think at the time I just felt like I did have a responsibility to do something because I was at least one of the creators from a Latine background that had a larger platform. And so a lot of that has been like trying to navigate, like, as a creator, when I amplify something, when I center myself something, or when I just leave it alone. Because I think people will do what they will do. That's what I learned from American Dirt. And they will misinterpret you and they will twist your words. So yeah, it was very unfortunate.
No, yeah, it's also interesting just like being a creator that has a platform in the way you do, or whether it could be anything. It could be BIPOC or any other different marginalized groups that have platforms where people come to you as the voice. Like, okay, what is Lupita saying? Like, how do you deal with that? Or do you you're
Mm.
almost we're getting into it, but just like how do you play into where you're like, I know people are looking to hear me, but I've sometimes haven't even got my full wording or full thought process on this yet, but I know people are gonna expect me to say something on it soon or something.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think it gets easier. I think the more I'm learning about being online, especially as someone that has a large platform, is people always want you to speak on something, even if you think you have no expertise on it or you have no, background on it. You don't have enough, like you said, you don't have enough time to like step in and really understand, how you feel about the thing. People want you to speak on it. I don't think that I've figured out or really learned how to navigate that, other than to just try to move from a place of care, like, and concern, from within myself when I'm ready. Because I think the other side of that is just virtue signaling, right?
Yeah.
And like asking myself, like, when I share something, when I amplify something, like, where is this coming from? Is this coming from a place of like, I feel indebted to people that are following me because they believe that I should be posting something or sharing something because I have a platform? Or is it coming from a place of, I really care about this thing and it's really hurting me. And, I feel like, what can we do? I feel helpless. This is the only way that I feel like I can help, and it's interesting because a lot of times when I ask myself that, when I really sit with it, I realize like, oh no, like I'm not fully somewhere where I'm supposed to be, on this thing or whatever it is. So I don't know. I think it's something that I still navigate. But the
Mm.
biggest way to navigate it is to just ask yourself, like, where do you really stand, and letting yourself just sit in it and have time,
That's well
which is
said.
not always easy because people want, like a quick,
Instant. Yeah, they want the think
yeah,
piece, they want the thoughts, they want everything, and it does get tough for creators. So that's why I appreciate just talking to content creators, like hearing the thought process of actually, and that's why we do podcasts, where to see how creators think in these moments and how they, because when we only see a picture of, like we were kind of talking about that before we got on, it's like you only see a picture sometimes of how people think from their internet self. But when you get a podcast in long form, you get to see how people deal with just when random things come up in the world. And now people are like, all right, I need to hear your opinion. And it's like, all right, well, I'm still figuring it out. But with
yeah.
that being said, like kind of going back a little bit, like what typically is your content creation process as a content creator in the book space, when you do like content days or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm really disorganized. Mine is really all over the place. I would love to romanticize it and be like, I have a calendar, and Mondays I film, and Tuesdays I edit. That is the goal eventually someday. But I think the thing that I forget, and then I also forget to remind folks, is that this is not my full-time job, and that I do have a full-time job, and that I take lunch hours to do things like this, and that has to be the priority, unfortunately. And so a lot of what I can post and what I do create is just outside of like hours. It's like, okay, I have an hour before I have to pick up my kid, and I'm offline from work now. Okay, so what are we thinking today? What are we feeling? What are the vibes? Like very much like, what are the vibes? And like I think last week it was like the vibes were like, okay, it's end of the year. Let's do wrap ups, and then let's figure out how to cross platform that content into
Right.
several pieces. So I did a wrap up for my Read Latine challenge, just a general wrap up, how many books I read for the challenge. Um, I ended up really posting pictures about the events that I got to do with Latine authors. That segued into a reel about like my top 10 Latine favorite books. And then I ended up segueing into a post, a static post, because I know some folks don't do reels. So that's 3 posts, for
Right.
one content idea. And so I think what I'm learning as a content creator is to maximize the one idea you have into several posts. And just, whatever way that you can present that, I try to remember now that the algorithms, they don't favor us. So although I feel like, damn, I'm being repetitive and I'm kind of posting about the same thing, I do always get comments from people that are like, oh, like I don't like reels. I think I got a comment from someone who's like, I don't like reels. So thank you for posting this like this. And someone else was like, oh, I hadn't seen this before. So it's like just put it out there. And so I think that's like my new content strategy that I'm trying to figure out is what can I do within an hour,
Right.
and how can I maximize the idea or the vibes of whatever it is that I want to post, whether it's like a book review for the day, um, or it's maybe speaking. I used to do bookstagram chats, which I want to return to, which is just a community check-in about a certain idea.
Right.
So maybe I want to do that and I want to expand on that. So that's kind of how I try to manage the content creation, or it could just be around a book. So
Yeah, that's a lot of good points. And how does writing fit into that? Because I read one of your essays, the fifth grade lesbian. It touches on like identity and your personal experiences. It was really well written. So I'm just curious, like, how does your writing shape your content?
um that's a really great question. I actually see the two as separate. Although, I think in my bio I list that I'm like a reader and a writer. For me, the reader comes first. The writer right now is a secondary thing. And that essay just came out of an idea but not an idea, sorry, a memory that came back from me during the pandemic. And it was just like I was taking a shower, and one day I was like, oh, what? I just remembered being in the fifth grade, the exact moment when someone called me lesbian. I was like, how'd they know? And I just was really fascinated that the idea came back. And I sat down and I really just, that same day I wrote at least like more than 1,500 words. And it just poured out of me, just this idea of like, or this memory, and just sitting in it and what it was like to be called that. And at first, I was having a lot of fun because I was like, this is really ironic. It's actually really funny, I think, to me. And then yeah, and then it took a turn and it became something more. So I don't know. Right now I see the two as separate. They don't commingle, but I will say, in order for me to be able to sit down and fully push that piece out, and go through the editing process with the editor at Asterisk Journal, who was amazing and who really helped me, like, dig into the core stuff of what that essay was about. I had a friend who has told me in the past and has always told me when I went to her about wanting to be a writer, to write something, she said to me, well, you write captions. And she's like, and your captions are so thoughtful. There's so much to them. Like, and so I know it seems really kind of almost cringe or silly to think that an Instagram caption could be something, but like that, her saying that to me kind of gave me that permission to call myself or just sit down and be like, okay, I can write. I can be a writer. And so yeah, I mean, it does mingle, and then it does, and then it's kind of a separate thing. Yeah.
No, you're definitely a writer. I heard it. The voice in the essay is really strong, and just
Oh,
it brings
wow.
you
Thank
in.
you.
So there's a lot to be seen through a creator's eyes when you read their stories.
Yeah, no, that means a lot to me. Thank you for reading it.
Yeah,
I'm like new to people reading it only because I feel like I just put it out there and I was like,
I think like when you talk to people, it's good to just see their whole world, So that's kind of, and speaking of that, like how do you kind of think about collaborating, amongst book
mm.
content creators and different projects? Like how do you think about that? Because I know you've done things with Las Comunidad and like things with libraries and organizations.
Yeah, so collaboration I think is something that I've learned to love that's happened and come through the Bookstagram space. It's like thanks to that, people are like, hey, we love your Bookstagram, we love what you're doing online, we'd love to have you to moderate, or and then that will like snowball into me moderating events in person, and then you never know who's in the audience, and so they'll be like, wait a minute, I am from such and such. I think I had so I'll backdate. I had I was interviewing an author at Politics and Prose, and they follow me on Instagram. I was a big advocate for their book online, and they were like, I would love to have you be my conversation partner for this event. And during that event, again, we had a great conversation, and then there happened to be someone in the audience there from Penn Faulkner who saw the interview, and they were like, hey, saw your interview, I know that you do stuff with DCPL, we'd love to have you moderate one of our panels for our literary, so they have literary conversations which are really amazing. Folks should tune into them. And I moderated one of their literary conversations for campus novels, which was really fun and really cool. And yeah, so it's just kind of been a snowball of where this trajectory takes me based off of those opportunities. And I do work right now. I have a standing collaboration with the DC Public Library, and so they're really invested in trying to amplify and support Latin literature. And so I basically moderate a book club series, we call it, with like an author inclusive book club series. And so we'll host authors in the DC Public Library's MLK Memorial Junior Library, which is a huge, beautiful building. And we've done it for 2 years, and we're hopefully continuing this year. And it's just been amazing to be able to collaborate with folks because you get to meet them in person, and those connections just solidify from online to in person. And I don't know, it's just so different to build in person versus online, I think, community.
Yeah, that's a good point. And talk to us about community. Like how do you think about fostering community and adding value within community?
Yeah, no. I've been thinking a lot about what we mean when we say the word community, because I think that ultimately I do think of the book online space. Part of it is a business, right? A business transaction. There's book sales involved, and there's all of that good stuff, right? So I think sometimes people they intertwine community with network. And I think that's been one of my biggest things about what I'm building, and what I'm promising or like hoping for. And it's really realizing that I want to be in community with people versus like in a network with folks. And I know that not everybody wants to be in your community or in community with you. But for me, the folks that I am in community with, the folks that I call my community are folks that's kind of what I need, not just a large network. And so I think an important way to do that is to support folks and to speak people into rooms that you're in,
Mhm.
to divest from individualism where you're like, I'm the only one that can do this. I'm the only one that's done this. And it's like, you're not. There's a lot of other people that are doing it. I know that in so many ways, I do have a lot of great publishers who in the past, and they continue to do so, come to me for, hey, who are other really amazing Latin book accounts that we should follow or that we should connect with, to send them books. And I'm like, oh, I always have a list. I always have a running list. So I think to me, community is about that mutual support and about creating collaboration, not just for yourself, but for others too. And I think, I had a friend who I was like telling her, I was like, oh, I have this other friend and I feel like you would love her. We should all have lunch together. And she's like, this is what you do all the time. Like you're constantly like connecting people. And I'm like, yeah, because I see the way in which you guys are doing things that are in parallel. And I can see it. I can see if it comes together, it's going to be this. You guys have so much to offer. So I don't know.
No,
That's
that
kind of how I
yeah.
see community.
I think you hit the nail on the head because you community and network are very much different. And I think even what we do when we think about at Bookham too is like, yes, social media has this algorithm that you can say something and it can go to anybody, but a lot of community is like peer to peer and friend to friend and people that are just like minded in your book, like the books that you love, right? Or even if you do want to get it to the next group of people, they still come into when they see your content, they see you as your full as who you are as a content creator. So like we think about that a lot too. So like even when you said that, I'm sitting there like, yeah, I mean that's kind of I think too much of social media has become algorithm pushes to the point
Mhm.
where like content community does kind of get changed. So like even when you're talking about in-person communities, just like that moment of like, all right, this is 30 of us, 40 of us coming together to read about this book to discuss in a longer form of a content. It might be an hour-long conversation, and there's discussions there that doesn't always get to happen when it's kind of like what we're talking about that fast pace and networking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the algorithms sometimes do not favor community at all. I wouldn't say sometimes, I would say a lot of times, even when you're thinking about um, amplifying relief, a lot of them suppress graphics or silence information. We've seen that happen with a lot of different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like the kind of that part of the algorithm, like talk to us about when you starting your challenge, Read Latine Lit, like what inspired it? How has the response been from readers, authors, like any surprises that have come from it?
Oh, yeah. So I started it last year. And I started it because I realized I was like, oh wow, I read a whole lot of books by Latine authors. And I was just thinking, I was like, I want to be reading these with other folks. I want to figure out how we can read a whole bunch of Latine authors together and be really excited about it. And then what that means for Latine literature and the support of Latine literature. Which felt like, with what I'm doing with La Comunidad Reads and DC Public Libraries, it felt like the online extension of it,
Mhm.
and I have to credit also Crystal from at Melanated Reader who started her challenge, which the first one was 20 books by Black women, and now she's doing 20 books by Black folks. And I was just like, what, I love this, and I'm doing her challenge, and I'm like, what can I do too? How can I provide that extension to complement what I'm doing in person online for folks who can't be there in person? Because we do meet in person, and though you can tune in on DCPL's YouTube channel, it's still that element of like, how can I be part of something? Which is, I think, another form of continuing to build community. And so, yeah, that's where it started. That's how I started it. It's been a lot of fun. I was definitely going to try to bring it back. But the reception was really great. A lot of people participated last year. You know, I love cheering people on. I think that's been the most fun thing, is getting to see what everyone else is reading. Um, I was really into the idea of figuring out a way to have people also write book reviews. Like, can we do a 1 hour Zoom during the week where people drop in and we write book reviews about the books we're reading? Not just Latine books, but book reviews in general, because I feel like, I don't know about you, but I've been really bad about writing book reviews after I finish. Um, and yeah, so I just, it's been really wonderful, I think, to be able to see what people are reading and to have them come back to me and just be like, look, I'm so excited that I read all these books. I've had a good amount of people come back and be like, it snowballed for me. Like, it was one Latine book a month, and then now I'm like at 20, and like I just love reading like just a spectrum of Latine authors. Like, you could really find them in every genre. And
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful, because we're hopefully breaking whatever stereotypes people might accidentally have about Latine literature. Magical realism, it's all just Isabel Allende. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that that is that is what it's doing, is it's pushing people to see a little bit more of the breadth and scope and spectrum of Latine literature and authors.
That's great. And then from like the author side, how's that been to have authors be like, hey, can you share about my book or talk about, like, how do you kind of do that when it comes to the challenge?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in terms of like creating community and collaboration, these past, I think, 2 or 3 years, I've actually reached out to another Latine creator who was on Twitter first. And they used to compile this large list of books coming out in, the future. But for example, they worked on this list last year, and it was like books coming out in 2025, right? But Latine books. And the thing about that, I think we don't talk about enough, is that books are really hard to find if they're not big title bestsellers that people are in your inbox pitching you, or that someone on Instagram already has a copy of. Like, those smaller press books, like, if you could spend hours Googling online, scrolling through social media, trying to find books that aren't basically going to be the next buzz book.
Mhm.
And so I collaborated with this wonderful creator, and that was because they went on Twitter and they were like, I do this list every year and I put it out for free. And they were like, I'm not doing it anymore until someone pays me. And I said, oh, I was like, I will pay you if you pull books that are coming out in the new year for Latine and queer books, because that's what I'm interested in. And so it was just a great way to be able to be like, I'm going to step up and provide that community support for you. And this year, I also paid her. And then she was also able to make the list live so that people could pay like her, give her a cup of coffee, pay her like $5 for the list. And so that's another way in which, I just feel like it's been just great being able to collaborate and to get authors to that come to me to, like, I just, I point them to the list and we're like, we can add you there. And whatever creator is, or whatever media is like hoping to amplify books, they can go and scroll through this list. I think now she has like 700 plus titles of
Oh, wow.
Latine and queer authors on the list. But I mean, if you're like, for example, if you're basically planning a podcast, right? And you're like, okay, well, I would like to, and say you think about diversity, like, I would like to think of some Latine authors to invite on the podcast, but you don't have anyone pitching you their books. There is the list. The list, you can go to the list, you'll find a book based on whatever genre, because she has middle grade, young adult, literary fiction, thrillers, like everything is on this list. Queer books, like I said. And I think that's been a way that I've been able to kind of, if authors come to me, like, give them a way to yeah, a way for people to find their books. Because I would love to be able to promote every single book in person that comes to me, but I just can't. I'm like one person, you know.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about how you think about like book criticism and feedback. Because the reason I ask is because when you are, talking about books that are already not highlighted, and
Mm.
then you're like, how do you think about it? Like, does it get challenging to say like, all right, this book just wasn't good, or kind of in that space? Because I think kind of to your point where it's like, all right, this book doesn't get a lot of shine, but then also if I'm just not, when it comes to negative criticism, I guess I'm just curious how you think about that as a creator, especially with your platform.
Yeah, I would have to be honest and say I used to be one of those folks that would say like I only post books that I'm really excited about, and that I really love. And I think my thoughts behind that have kind of evolved. And I think that because of good friends like Tracy, you had her on, I think yesterday, Tracy from the Stacks podcast. And I love her motto, which is just like talking shit about books is good for books. And I think she's absolutely right. I think the more you think about it, the more like you're really being thoughtful and dissecting something when you're being critical of it, because you're not just, and it's not to say you can't do that as well when you love a book, because I think that, I've seen some really great book reviews that are positive, and I love the way that people can review a book with that level of positivity and detail. But criticism really gets into the nitty gritty too, of like what it was that necessarily might not have worked for a book, but also is indicative of a bigger problem within a genre or within like um, publishing. I think we think about, I can even think about it now, and I can't say that there's a specific book I have in mind, but at least with Latine literature, from my understanding, from what I've heard from other authors, is that there is a specific book that, publishing wants or prefers Latine writers to write in. And then that's that American Dirt book. Those books that like make readers feel good about themselves and feel you know, um, like bigger problems like immigration and like, you know, um, being marginalized, or xenophobia are things that they're not involved in, that they're not part of, right? That it's just an outsider's problem. And unfortunately, yeah, there might be those instances where an author does decide to write towards that, maybe because they want to be able to publish a book, or maybe because they don't have an option and an editor is just like, you sold it, you signed something and you said you wanted it published, so we're going to have you edit this the way that we want you to have it edited. So again, I think that criticism could unfold that, or there could be that one book that is just indicative of a pattern of other books that maybe have the same editor, and it's like, wait a minute, there's a problem here. I don't know. I think criticism is really important for books. I think that I would love, my goal is to be more critical of books, regardless of who they're written by or who they're
Yeah.
written by. Yeah.
In the same way we are with like, book or with art or movies too. Because if you see a
Yeah.
movie and you're like, all right, I don't like this movie, you still go tell 10 people and they're like, oh, and then now they're like, well, you said this one part and I actually do like that. So I went and watched it. You said it was so bad. I actually went and spent the time to go watch it. So I think there is that level of criticism and negativity that when you do, if you, especially when you're talking about it in a critical way, you're explaining it in depth, people are like, okay, I see what Lupita's getting at. Now I'm interested in reading this book or not. As we kind of transition into read out, one thing we really do enjoy is like when content creators meet up in person. And one of the things I thought was really cool is that you all got to meet Oprah. So can you kind of talk about that experience and just meeting content creators, but also meeting Oprah, who is, as big as she is in books as well.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That was wild. I think what was really cool about that was, again, what you just said, meeting other creators. And so I will say that the event was, I think, I'm not sure who was on the guest list, but my understanding that a lot of the creators there were New York based creators. And so I thought that it was just really cool to be able to meet the New York based creators that I hadn't met before. And meeting Oprah herself was something. It was like I think I was more in awe of um, her, not her influence, but her presence. Um, it's something that I think it's not that it didn't translate for me online before, but the power of her presence, the way that you don't see people hop online all the time and like give testimony to Oprah and what she's done and how she's helped other people's lives just being who she is. But when we were in that room, it was like people just wanted their chance to like give testimony to what it means, like who she is to them and what it is that they've done in their lives, and what it is that her presence and just her existing as a person has done. And I think that that was mind blowing. I was like, wow, like it's not that I didn't think like, whoa, Oprah. It was just like she meant something more. I don't know if that I don't know. It was just to be able to hear people's stories was like,
That's awesome.
damn. I was like shaking and like, you're crying with people and you're like, it's not my story, but damn, like, I thought that was really like goosebumps.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Let's get into you as a reader. Like, what's the last book you read? What are you reading next? And what are you reading now? And what do you plan to read next?
Yeah. So, let's see. I just finished. So Libro FM has an influencers program where they let you get advanced readers listening copies. And so I listened to their book that they had on there called Sociopath, a memoir by Patrick Genke, which is basically a book written by a clinical psychologist. She got her PhD, and she is a sociopath. And so it was such a fascinating book about her basically going back to childhood and detailing the ways in which she realized early on that she was a sociopath and that there was something different about her. It just was a very enlightening book too, in terms of mental health, mental illness. I think self-perception was the biggest thing I got, and navigating self-perception and then also external perception and how you want to be perceived. And it was really, really good. And I'm currently listening to Defectors by Paula Ramos, and it's the rise of the far right and how Latinos basically helped vote Trump into presidency, which is something. Yeah, I've never had to pause an audiobook, but I'm finding myself needing to pause it to really digest a lot of the history, because I was just like, not only did I not know it, but also just to try to understand and process what it means, like really sit in it.
Yeah.
So that one's taking me a little bit, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really, really interesting. I think her approach to want to understand people versus to, push back and be like, I don't want nothing to do with folks. I think that's something that is really like admirable, because I don't know that I could do it. So
That's awesome. We'll make sure to add those to the show notes so people can check them
yeah.
out. Let's get into some rapid fire. What's an important book you don't see a lot of people talking about?
Oof. Um, uh, important book I don't see a lot of people talking about. Oh my gosh. Um, well, I'm gonna say I talk about this book a lot. I'm just gonna throw it out there. How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruz. I think it's an important book. I think it's a book that makes basically the immigrant experience accessible through fiction. I think it's a book that my mother loved, and that I think a lot of women that are navigated moving to a new country and having to learn a new language and a completely different culture would really enjoy, but also, people who are far removed from the experience who might be like, I don't know what that's like. I think it's just like a little lens into what that could be like. Yeah.
Perfect. What's the best page turner written by a Latine author from last year?
Oh, best page turner written by a Latine author from last year. I literally just did my top 10 and top 5. I'm gonna say magical slash realism, and Vanessa Angelica Villarreal. So I got her her middle name was Angelica, but it's Vanessa Angelica Villarreal. It's magical realisms. It's essays on music, memory, fantasy, and borders. It is such a fascinating book. I think what I love about it is that she weaves in pop culture with her experience as a child of immigrants, and so I think that it's so interesting. Like, even like if you're a gamer, you'll love this. If you love Game of Thrones, you'll love it. Like, if you love David Bowie, or you know of David Bowie and you're like really, you would love it. Like Selena, she like goes everywhere, and I think it's so cool to be able to kind of see like the breadth of what she's writing about.
Very cool. What was your favorite? This is tough, but what was your favorite book of 2024?
This is not tough, actually.
Okay.
I haven't told anyone yet, so you're the first. So I think my favorite book of 2024 has got to be The Safe Keep by and I'm not good at pronouncing names, so let's see if I can. Okay, I think it's Yale Vander Wooden, and it's called The Safe Keep. It was one of those novels that reminded me. I was telling my wife, it's one of those novels that basically was Kamala Harris's like, meme that went viral about you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree sort of thing. It's like one of those books that reminds you of that like history is so present within everything we do.
Yeah.
And the ways in which you can just ignore it or not see it and not understand it and the impact that it has later on. I don't want it's like I don't want to I'm veering on spoiler territory, so I don't want to give a lot away, but yeah, it's got plot twists. It took me out of myself and I was like, oh my God. I was angry at myself for not seeing it. But just again, a book that made me want to know more about something that I obviously didn't know about.
Perfect. Wow. What's a book you're looking forward to reading in 2025?
Oh, yes. So I actually got it today. I cannot wait to read it. I might start it soon, if not today. Black and Blues by Imani Perry. Um, I loved South. Was it South to America or yeah,
Yeah, South to
South
America.
America.
Of
South
course.
to America. Yeah, I don't know why I was gonna say something. South to America so much. And I've told everybody literally, like I'm like, I'm not someone who's always necessarily, I think, great about reading history or really processing it or being able to understand it, but just Imani's writing and approach to telling it, it just makes you want more. And so I'm just really excited about Black and Blues and I can't wait to read it.
Perfect. And what is the best part of being a book content creator?
Oh man, I think the best part is being able to connect with people and being able to like yeah, connect to people through books. I've gotten a lot of really sweet messages from folks that are like, and sometimes they're long messages and they're like, you recommended this book, I read it, and I've just felt so seen and like understood in a way that I hadn't before. And so, yeah, I think that's my favorite part.
Perfect. The way we like to end this podcast, two-sided question, but you can answer it however you like. What would you like to see more of in the book world?
Oh, yes. I'm going to say criticism. I want to see more criticism. I would love to see a lot more criticism in the book world. I think like I said, like my friend Tracy says, criticism is good for books. What else would I like to see? Obviously, a lot more Latine books, a lot more like big buzz around Latine books.
Perfect. And on the other side, what would you like to see less of in the book world?
Oh, I don't know. Ugh, I don't know. Honestly, I just wish that people would be more open. That you know, they would. Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard one. I should have
No,
prepared for that one.
no worries at all. Thank you so much, Lupita. Let us know what's coming up in your world, anything that we can support, or just where we can find you on the internet.
All right, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
All right, take care and have a great rest of your day.